United States was the protector of South Vietnam since 1954, after the Geneva Conference divided Vietnam into Communist North and pro-Western South. President Eisenhower placed military advisors and CIA operatives in Vietnam. In hopes to fight the spread of communism, President John F. Kennedy sent military advisors in 1961 to Vietnam. President Lyndon B. Johnson ordered the first real combat by American troops, which sparked opposition within the American people on the Vietnam War. American citizens used protest tactics of picketing, sit-ins, strikes, civil disobedience, and rallies in disapproval to the war. With students being a major group outraged with the United States' involvement with the Vietnam War, these anti-war protest tactics led to the horrific shootings that took place at Kent State University in Ohio on May 4, 1970. During this time, 75% of people deployed into the war were from working families, with poor youths twice as likely to serve than those from the upper middle classes. The Victory Bell at Kent State, used to symbolize wins at football games, rang at noon to call a rally. A large group of students gathered on the commons to rally against the war, chanting, "Bring the war home." A group of history students buried a copy of the Constitution to symbolize Nixon had killed the Constitution. That night, students went around Ohio throwing beer bottles at police cars and began breaking windows of several businesses and setting fires around town. A large demonstration was now underway on the campus. 300 people gathered on the commons, chanting and giving brief speeches. The students began marching towards the dormitories to get more people to join in their protests. They surrounded the ROTC building on the campus, which was scheduled to be demolished, broke the windows of the building, and set it afire. Later that night, they declared martial law at 10:30 p.m. The governor ordered 600 guardsmen onto the campus. Their orders? To clear the campus, forcing students and even non-students into dormitories. On May 3, 1970, the campus was fairly quiet. The Ohio National Guard were now occupied on the campus. A large crowd gathered on the commons, and guards issued a curfew, but the crowd refused to leave. A brave student protested by saying, "We will use whatever force necessary to drive them out of Kent." Later that day, a National Guard commander told his troops that Ohio law gave them the right to shoot if necessary. Helicopters began to fly in overhead and drop tear gas onto the students. Students tried demonstrating that the curfew was unnecessary by peacefully marching towards town, but were met by guardsmen. They formed a spontaneous sit-in at the intersections of East Main and Lincoln Streets, demanding that Mayor Satrom and Kent State's President Robert White speak with them about the guards being occupied on campus. The guards enforced the curfew by using tear gas once again, by dumping it on protesters from helicopters above. On the tragic day of the shootings, around 11 a.m., 200 students gathered on the commons. Earlier that day, officials met at Kent State thinking the governor had declared martial law once again, when in fact, he hadn't. Around noon, the crowd had grown from 200 people to 1,500. Some people were taking part in chants, while others were simply spectators. National Guard jeeps began to file in front of the students, and by bullhorn, they were told to disperse immediately. The students used civil disobedience by staying and responding with jeers and chants. Refusing to disperse, the general ordered the guardsmen to disperse them. 116 guards with rifles and tear gas started toward the students. The students began to run away immediately, remembering the bayonet injuries that occurred the evening before. After clearing the commons, the guards marched over the hill, firing tear gas onto the students. Some students retaliated by throwing rocks at the guards. The guards reacted by throwing rocks back at the students. They were basically in full-out war at this point. A majority of the students who were on the hill were simply spectators and bystanders, not taking part in the rally. Within minutes, the guards began to fire upon the students from the parking lot. Four students were killed. 9 were wounded, with one of the wounded permanently paralyzed. Jeffrey Glenn Miller was shot in the mouth by the guard while standing on an access road. The bullet exited through the back of his head. Sandra Lee Schuer was killed by the guard. It was also her parents' wedding anniversary that same day. Allison Krause was a new freshman at Kent State. William Knox Schroeder was shot in the back. He wasn't even taking part in the protest, simply going from one class to the next. When the gunshots were fired, he fled. He died with the textbook in his hand. The New York Times published a story on the 4 students killed, then later mentioning that 4 million students would then go on strike at more than 450 universities and colleges. After the horrific events at Kent State University, President Richard Nixon then went on to say, "This should remind us all once again that when dissent turns to violence, it invites tragedy. It is my hope that this tragic and unfortunate incident will strengthen the determination of all the nation's campuses, administrators, faculty, and students alike to stand firmly for the right which exists in this country, for peaceful dissent, and just as strong against the resort to violence as a means of such expression." Due to the pressure to end the war from angered American citizens around the nation protesting and turning to violence, President Nixon then ended the war by slowly pulling troops out from Vietnam. To this day, Kent State University honors the 4 students shot and killed by the Ohio National Guard.